Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at the Rock Island Auction Company, and we are taking a look at a Serbian model of 1908 Mauser carbine. Now if you watched yesterday's video, you will know that in 1899 Serbia was able to upgrade from their existing 1880 obsolete single-shot black powder rifles to a new, really cutting-edge, totally modern Mauser repeating rifle in the really excellent 7x57 cartridge. Now, they didn't quite have enough money in 1899 to buy as many guns as they really wanted for their military, so they kept looking around, and in 1906 they were able to secure a loan from the French government for 95 million francs, of which about half were put towards arms production or arms purchase. Now, they originally had tried to buy guns from Mauser. Mauser was busy, so they ended up buying them from DWM. Well, when 1906 came around, or actually it was like December of 06 when they got the money, when they actually placed the orders in 1907, this time they ended up going to Steyr in Austria. And they basically said, hey, we want this exact same rifle, with a couple of little teeny upgrades, which we'll take a look at in a moment when we look at this guy up close. Little upgrade to the bolt, little upgrade to the rear sight, but in general, just the same Mauser pattern rifle that we got before, same cartridge, but we want more of them. They placed an order for 30,000 rifles. They placed a second order for 10,000 carbines, and what we have here is one of the carbines. The carbines were designated the model of 1908. The rifles were designated the model of 1899/07. And then they also actually placed an order for 50,000 barrels in 7mm Mauser. And the reason for that was they were going to use those barrels to go ahead and rebuild their 1880 rifles in 7mm. That's something that a lot of countries did around this time period. So Steyr was quite happy to take their money. Guns went into production, and by 1909, all of the stuff had been delivered. Really a pretty uneventful contract. And this was the first time that the Serbians actually had a smokeless powder repeating carbine. And it's this carbine that we're going to focus on today because, you know what, it's a really handy little carbine. And between the short overall length and the 7x57 cartridge, this I think would be right up there with like the Swedish Mauser carbines for some of the nicest carbines of this type put out during the war. You'll notice, in fact, this has a semi-pistol grip stock. It's a really handy gun. Well, to manipulate. And well, let's just take a closer look, and I'll show you the few changes that they did make from the 99 to this 1907 or 1908 pattern. Unlike yesterday's long rifle, today's carbine actually has a really nicely visible and well-preserved Serbian crest on the receiver right there. And it's marked model 1908, as all of these carbines were. The rifles from this order would have been marked 1899/07 or 99/07. We have a marking on the side of the receiver, as usual, indicating where the guns were made. And this translates to Austrian Arms Factory Steyr. Makes sense. Serial number over here, 4,100 out of 10,000. Now, I say 10,000. Actually, in 1910 and 1911, the Serbians received an additional couple of shipments of guns from Steyr, a total of 2,530 more. That included rifles and carbines, and there's not any really good documentation of it, but what it appears is that when they were making, the guns for the contract, Steyr, of course, made more parts and more guns than they needed, anticipating, quality control problems and rejects and various problems. They wanted to make sure they had enough, and it appears at the end of the contract they actually had about a 5% overrun. And so most likely what they did is offer those to Serbia at a particularly good price. The Serbs accepted, and so they got a couple thousand extra guns out of the deal. There's also still this cool Serbian property mark in the stock. That's unusual to see on a rifle this old that presumably went through World War I. This being a carbine, typically intended to be carried across the back instead of over the shoulder. The sling swivels are on the side, so left side of the buttstock there. You can see the bolt that holds it in place. And then there's a sling swivel on the front barrel band. There's that nice pistol grip swell to the stock. That's, I think, a really handy improvement. And that's something that other really nice carbines like the Swedish Mauser carbines don't have. The nose cap here is the typical in style to most Mauser carbines, but a little bit different in exact details. We do have two wings there protecting a barleycorn style front sight, and the whole thing is held in place by a crossbolt. Handguard goes all the way out to the very end, and there's no bayonet lug. Now the rear sights on these go out to 1,500 meters, a little less than the 2,000 of the long rifle variety. However, they have an improved style of adjustment. This is one of the few little changes that was made between the 1899 pattern and these 1907 and 1908 guns. So we looked at this yesterday, ignoring the fact that this carbine sight is shorter than this rifle sight because that's just a barrel length difference. You can see that the adjustment button or the release button on the slider for the original guns just pivots down, so it tips down like this. The replacement sight, which was designed by a guy named Filip Petrovic, who is an engineer working for the Serbian military, this one actually pushes directly in, and this one I think has some grease or grime in it. It doesn't really want to go in. But the idea is, instead of just pivoting, which is fairly easy to wear on, this one has more engagement surface and you have to press the whole lever all the way inward. And to go with that, the notches which were originally on the outside of the sight are now located on the inside edge of the sight. A little easier to see them there from the side. So these factors put together made this a stronger rear sight, and that got rid of the problem that they'd originally had with the adjustment slider coming loose over time. The 1908 was still a cock-on close bolt, and it still has a follower with an angle cut, so you can close the bolt with the magazine empty. However, they did make one change to the underside of the bolt. And of course it has a bent handle to it, being a carbine. That's pretty typical. Now if we look at the underside of the bolt, this is our 1908, this is our 1899. They have added a gas relief hole. So if you should have a burst cartridge, the gas will come back through the firing pin hole and vent down here, where it's much safer to the shooter than on the original gun, where it's going to come back into the bolt and potentially come out the back and get into the shooter's eye. So this improvement, that cut hole, was made to both the 8907 rifles and the 1908 carbines. And that's really it for changes. Other than that, this is the same pattern of gun, just in a nice, handy little carbine form. Carbines were never really the focal point of any military force. They were always an extra weapon, a secondary thing, a specialized thing. You gave these to engineers and maybe artillery crews, cavalry, guys who weren't really expected to do necessarily all that much shooting with their issue rifle. So you wanted something that was a little handier, easier to carry, out of the way, doesn't obstruct their other, probably more important duties. As a result, they're always pretty much scarcer than the full-length rifle equivalents, and this is no exception. So Serbia only ordered 10,000 of these. They had about 9,500 of them still in inventory when World War I broke out. By the end of World War I, most of these were gone. The Serbian army took a really serious beating in 1915, had to, as we discussed yesterday, had to be evacuated by the Allies out to Greece, and was rearmed with French weapons instead. So the Serbian guns are all pretty rare and scarce, hard to come by, the carbines in particular. So this is a really good example of one. If you're interested in more details on this, Rock Island has things like their value estimate and their pictures and everything, and you can take a look at their catalog page by way of ForgottenWeapons.com, which is linked in the description text below. Thanks for watching.